let this moment not pass without us also thanking the timpanist, this man with this big noise up the front. Would you thank him? Years ago, many years ago, in fact, a woman came to see me with this story. She said, I can't get this thing out of my mind. I keep going over it again and again. I wish I could forget it. I can't forget it. Of course, there was something in me that wanted to say, no, you can't forget it if you keep on going over it and over it. But that is too easy. How can we quickly forget something that was such a significant event? Maybe a traumatic event, troublesome event, sad event, an angry event. And at the time it occurred, there it was, but over the time it's gathered emotion, strong emotions. And other people have come in and fed it with their stories, their unsettled emotions, or even their sympathy has kept it alive. So many people will have such stories. And they're likely to say, I'm so frustrated, I'm so angry, I'm so hurt, I'm so dead inside. How can such a person hear the story of Easter Day, of coming alive to a new way to live, when they've been so blocked by what has happened in the past? If their theory of mind says it's impossible to get over a thing like this, then of course their theory will likely to be fulfilled. But I ask the question, when did that event occur? 26 years ago? 46 years ago? How long do you think that event will go on affecting you? Well, look at what happened to my father, she says. He said he would go to his grave and never forgive what his brothers did to him. His brothers did to him. And her father lived to very old age. Did he harbor his grudge against his brothers, until his dying day, as he promised? And what effect did that grudge have on his brothers, who were living in another country, no doubt enjoying life there? But she said, my father and mother and my two sisters and I were all affected by what happened back there and then. 2 generations, even maybe 3 generations of people draining their emotional energy, avoiding the pathways to their happiness because of an event 26 years ago that really had no direct impact on the subsequent generations at all, but they're affected by it. Today is Resurrection Day. A story that tangles people up, of course, in arguments about beliefs and creeds and all the rest. Leave that. As I mentioned earlier, next week I'll be asking you to consider Caravaggio's painting of the Supper at Emmaus. By the artist's brush, we see 2 groups of people. Well, one group and one person. One group, you see in their faces, a group deeply troubled by what has occurred in the past. And then you have one man leaping back in astonishment as he realized the implications of this present moment. As the story said of Jesus, the presence, right there. One lot of people troubled over the past, about the past, by the past. One man struck by the moment that would change the lives of millions of people. This address today asks the question, what happens when a person comes alive, comes really alive? What happens? But in order to get at that question, we're going to go through three stages. First, to come alive, we need to get some release from those things that block us from coming alive. We know in biblical and church language we might talk about forgiveness. But are we talking about forgiveness? Forgiving yourself, forgiving other people? Forgiveness is a word. Many books and essays have been written on forgiveness. But forgiveness requires a process of release. If there is no release, you remain stuck. So the psychological word today is release. The theological corollary is to come alive to life in all its fullness. One of the marks of our emotional and mental health, our emotional and mental resilience, is the capacity to release yourself and to release somebody else. Often the task of life is to find an effective way to live with our unreleased state. But our contentment and the management of our discontent depends very much on how we come to terms with this process of release, releasing in ourselves and releasing others. So, I will describe some features of a person who comes alive. And I shall relate, that's in the second part of my address. And in the third part, I shall relate those two processes, the release and the process of coming alive. I'll then relate those two processes to the resurrection story that we read today, and how psychology and theology help us to embrace the practical significance of that story, and how our life and our spiritual evolution and our growth have thereby been enriched. So to start with, here are the words that are basic to the practice of psychotherapy, and words that are central to a theology of life. From the letter to the Ephesians, the people of Ephesus that we read today, two aspects of the story. You are to leave your old ways behind and embrace a new way of being. It is possible for you to be made new in mind and spirit. And the second, look for that way of liberation and live with love in your hearts as Christ urged us so to do. So the first part of this address. She said, I keep going over it. The same thing over and again. I can't forget what they did. The memory of it just hangs there. A victim of a memory. So we need to find a way to release that person from that repetitious state. We need to be released from what people did to her. We need to be released from those memories. Otherwise, She will remain stuck. Of course, there are other examples, and you know them, where someone will say, we could never be the same after what's happened. Of course you can't be the same. But they mean more than just that, don't they? We cannot wipe out what we saw. Though we wish certain things did not happen, what happened, happened. And there is no release from those realities. There they are. Yes, yes. We see how difficult it is to rise above the burdens of our crippled aspects of the past. And yet the human story is well populated by people who have shown that a new life is possible. New mind and spirit, in spite of huge difficulties. Some of you will remember, I think, the story of Ellen Marshall's, told in Ellen Marshall's autobiography, when despite a childhood crippling by poliomyelitis, he showed that he could go on playing as a young fellow. He could go on climbing trees, would you believe it? He could swim, he could ride, he could laugh. And from a lifetime of crippled state and obstacles, he wrote that classic, I Can Jump Puddles. Where do we go with our problems of finding some release? In a previous generation, Sigmund Freud wrote about the defense mechanisms. He could see that we needed to find a way through our anxieties. Anxieties which could be hidden from us and yet were strong influences in our lives. The unconscious anxieties, the conscious anxieties, all those anxieties that play havoc with our life. He said, but we have available to us defense mechanisms which help us to cope with those anxieties. I think in this generation we might think of what I've called the release mechanisms, and I've developed some 8 of them. 8 of them. And I'd like to take you through just a few of them today. Release mechanisms to release us from those powerful emotions, those troubling memories, those damaging or damaged parts of our life. So number 1, we need to reposition ourselves. Reposition is the first word in the release mechanism. To reposition ourselves in relation to that past event. If you let it just sit there, if it's right there present all the time, then of course it's going to affect you. But if you reposition yourself in relation to that event, or reposition that event in relation to you, somehow we're going to put some distance between that event and yourself. Or that event that reminds you and troubles you. Or we're going to reposition yourself in a different environment. An environment likely to facilitate some clear air for you to live differently. So there's number 1 issue that we want to put, repositioning is one part of the process, the release process. Number 2. Number 2 is to be able to regulate your tendencies to regress into the past. That regressive and indeed that aggressive impulse can take over. We need to be able to find a way to reduce the negative emotional loadings that push us this way and that. Happily, the last edition of Scientific American contains an article by Roy Baumeister. And in it he says this: people with good regulative control over their thought processes over their emotions, over their behaviour, not only flourish, I'd like to add a word, can be helped to flourish in their jobs and are healthier, wealthier, and even more popular. And they have better intimate relationships, and they're likely to live longer. What's he saying? He's saying in the scientific magazine, the important thing is to regain or to gain for the first time an appropriate regulation of those impulses that would tangle us up in the past and the emotions that keep us back there. Number three. The third process is to refocus your conversation away from those constant repetitious recallings of the past. Refocus the conversation onto something positive, some positive aspect, positive attitudes, positive aftermath reactions. Refocus the conversation. Oh, it's easy to go on going over it again, and other people will help you in your conversation to keep you conversing over it. But it's important to find someone who knows how to get that conversation moving away, helping you to refocus that conversation. Number 4, resolve to restore. You notice the words I'm taking all begin with R, release mechanisms, repositioning, regulating, refocusing, now restoring. Restore your self-worth. Restore your self-dignity. Restore your self-enhancements. Restore your self-strengths. Restore your self-containment. Restore your self-soothing. Restore your self-enjoyment. Restore your self-efficacy. Restore your self-dignity. Because as we get that self working better for us, then it's making better decisions, guiding you into a different pathway. Number 5. Release means not only being released from something, it means being released into something. Released into something. Your dog, if you have a dog, will be excited to be released from the nighttime lockdown. And when he's released from that lockdown, he's in a new space. There are new possibilities open before him. There's new scope to live differently, and he wants you to come on and enjoy this new day. Will you? Or will you tell him to be quiet? We are inclined to be so locked up that we forget that we can be free. Jesus said you would know the truth, and that truth will set you free. You need that to come alive. And so there's part 1 of my address. Part 2, I'm going to talk about coming alive. And just as I gave 5 parts of the release today, I'm going to give 5 parts to the process of coming alive. What is it like for a person to come alive? Think about that. If you know a person who's come alive, you would know, first of all, that they have seen the world in different colours. They've seen the world in a different light. They have a larger view of the world. A person who hasn't come alive today or yesterday or the day before, they have compacted themselves into a narrow view of the world, into a narrow view of themselves, into a narrow view of life. But the person who comes alive, coming out of that. While it is so easy for any one of us to fall back into those limiting fixations, release means enjoying the freedom of the larger view, noticing it, enjoying it. Life is to be lived, you see, in a larger context. Fullness is the goal. The existentialist Albert Camus was a philosopher of the absurd. But you know, one of his greatest writings, he said, in the depths of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer. A person who has come alive, secondly, has the energy of good goals. Their goals are attractive, their goals are focused forward and positive, their goals are challenging, energizing, and they want to be part of the whole spirituality, the whole spiritual expansiveness of enriching activities. Number two. Number three, the person really alive will want to embrace new possibilities, new goals. The rewards of reshaping their life, reshaping it after a trouble-laden event, after our griefs and sorrows, after us falling over, after our many failures. I call this reshape-a-lessons, reshaping your future, reshaping your life repeatedly. It helps to ensure that you'll come alive. Number four, coming alive entails a commitment to this cause, a cause of conscientiously contributing to the objectives of some good cause, dealing constructively with setbacks, but continuing to be an agent of consolation, of hope and healing. When the good cause runs into bad times or down times, don't give it up. Look at the good cause again and help it to become new in a different way. Yes, you cannot live as you once lived, but you can now live differently and more fully, if you like, if you decide, if you can become so committed. Number five, coming alive means searching and developing the expression and the events of nurturing and strengthening and renewing the human spirit. Just as a garden needs replanting, restructuring, refeeding, if it is to flourish again, so does the human spirit. We need to be part of that process. So rather than sitting back or going into a hole and saying, see what's happened to me, recognize that if you want to come alive again, we need to be part of that rebuilding, re-nurturing in order to flourish again. Release mechanisms and the principles of coming alive run side by side. And one can feed the other. Notice that. Release is important for coming alive. Coming alive, effectively, is helped by those release mechanisms. Both are highly dependent on our internal state, the internal state of the self, the spirit, self-awareness, self-motivation. And both are highly dependent on the external stimulation, the external supports of other people, the surrounding positive strengths, and the significant life symbols. So the third part of my address is about this Easter day. We have the story of a man of our humanity rising above the destructiveness and speaking words of courage and hope, inspiring all who would listen to rise above their destructiveness and their deadness and explore the way to be released from their negativity and come alive to a new way of being, to life in all its fullness. The astonishing possibility lives on the baseline of this, the baseline of a therapeutic theory and practice. And it sits as the central component, the central symbol of the faith. For thereby, you see, the resurrection story of the gospel is more than a story of religion and theology of some previous era, if you like, of some irrelevant organization, if you like. The resurrection story can become more than that. It is a vital way for everyone to leave whatever may be tangling up their past and come alive and focus on being new in mind and spirit in the present. Would you please stand? And would you say on this Easter day, would you say, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And the blessing for this Easter day. May the God you see in all the colours of creation arouse in you a sense of awe and wonder. May the God who is a sacred presence be real to you. May the God who is a source of inspiration and courage keep calling you forwards. May your God go with you and bless you today and always.